So, John Boone, American hero, first man on Mars, second man on Mars, is dead. And he was killed by Arabs. And everybody's really upset. And now we are back at the beginning of the book. Race war, question mark? A Brave New World? Question mark? Oh, thank you. The intro to part 6, Guns Under the Table, talked about people mourning John's death and transitioned into a myth about Paul Bunyan and Big Man, which will not be repeated here. It was heavily censored for the public broadcast. Just kidding, I read it totally uncensored. Anyways, it transitioned into a myth about Paul Bunyan and Big Man, who definitely did not have a shitting competition. And the next part deals with a big conference to renegotiate the Mars Treaty. What did that spell? That it got censored, actually. Okay, to renegotiate the Mars Treaty, Frank warns the conference against proposals that aren't actually in their best interest and tries to maneuver them into an agreement that divides profits from Mars equally and protects the interests of the current Martian population. Oh my god, sir, no. Okay, that was a really... Okay, I'm blushing right now because I don't want to be mean, but I'm not being mean. That was a horrible summary. Oh my god. That's what Frank says is happening. Frank is not arguing. See, this is what I was worried about when everyone was talking about like I don't know, maybe the book is going to end differently than I think it will, but when everyone's talking about like Kim Stanley Robinson is racist because the character is racist, like I feel like you guys are taking things at face value here. The next part deals with a big conference. Also, I'm not sure if that's what you were saying because your word got messed up there. But I think you said the next part deals with a big conference to renegotiate the Mars Treaty. That is true. They're renegotiating the Martian Treaty. It's complicated. It's political. I think most people want the treaty to stay the same because it's as close as you can get to like the Antarctic Treaty, where Mars is meant to be for science, and that this should be a scientific society, and that we actually shouldn't have the profit interest influencing what gets done there, even though it's already too late. Anyways, okay, Frank warns the conference against proposals that aren't actually in their best interest. Frank warns the conference against proposals that aren't in his interest. And he tells them it's not their best interest. But what it actually is not his best interest. And he's trying to maneuver them into an agreement that benefits his country and his plan the most. He literally, after he killed John, he said, let's see what I can do with this planet. He's trying to maneuver them into an agreement that benefits him. And he's telling them that it will benefit everyone equally. And it will protect their interests. So, that's basically it. He's manipulating. I don't trust him one bit. That's what John wanted to do. If that's what Frank cared about, why did he murder John? Well, I know why. Okay, that could be mutually. That doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. He just really hated John, and he thought that John wouldn't do it the right way. But I don't really know what Frank's motives are. I don't think any of us do, but they're definitely not. They're definitely not for the good of everybody and to divide the profits equally. He doesn't like the way John does things and the way everybody loves John. And John's always the center of attention. John. I had to kill him, you see? He was gonna mess it all up. Frank is greed, yes. I love this book, though. It's a delicious, delicious political drama. I can't even summarize it. I mean, but just look at the world today, okay, you know? And you should know you shouldn't trust Frank. And even if Frank has good intentions, which I don't think he does, the road to hell, as they say, is paved with good intentions. John was the type of guy who never had to suffer the consequences of his actions. He literally died. Roar. He literally was murdered. Okay, what were his actions that he had to suffer? Okay, he's like he's like, okay, John does come, he's very easy to dislike if you're a certain person. He's so disgustingly charming. He can come off as a bit of like, he's a bit racist. I'll say that. I think that does need to be addressed. Frank's like, okay, John is like, he's like boomer, like Karen, he's not, I don't know how to say it. Like, is there a word for like when white people try not to be racist, but they end up like being more racist because of that, you know? He's like, I never met a Muslim that could read before. You're pretty neat. And you're just like, John, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, he's like he means well, but he's like, he's like, oh wow, your English is so good. And they're like, they were like born in America. He's the guy who goes to a party and laughs, and he's like, haha, I'm the only white guy here. But like doesn't feel like Frank is so much worse. Frank is like so scary. He's like nobody thinks Frank is racist because he can speak like 7 languages and he hangs out with the Arabs all day, but he's only doing that so that he can manipulate Islamophobia. So that he literally gets John murdered because he's encouraging people to think that John is racist, and he's using xenophobia and plotting on people's insecurities to reach his goals. Like, it's so fucking crazy. Okay. And then he's literally, okay, so, like, where we last left off, he was talking to the representatives at the conference from China and India. So, we all know about China and India, right, guys? So he's trying to tell China and India that they should work with him and they should change their like, what does he say? That's what transnational capitalism means. We're all colonies now. Okay, so, oh my God, and he literally uses like communist language. Not even, like, okay, forget about what, this is so hard to translate. And this was literally written in 1995. Okay, but he uses, like, he's like, this is what transnational capitalism means for Mars. We're all colonies now. And there's a tremendous pressure on us here to alter the treaty so that most of the profits from local mining become the property of the transnationals. The developed nations are feeling that very strongly. He literally tells them, look, Chalmers said to his 2 colleagues, the expense of emigration is so great that you will never... Okay, and they have population problems on Earth. I literally can't summarize this. Okay, but where should I begin? Mars. John got murdered. You heard all of that. And then now they've created a vaccine for old age. If you literally get like a shot in your arm, you'll stop aging. And your body will last for like 200 years minimum. And now Earth found out about it, and they all want the vaccine, and now Earth has it's exploding everything, you know, like everyone on Earth wants this vaccine, but that also means like society is going to radically change. Like, okay, well, if we give everybody the vaccine, then you have to promise not to have children. As well, but then these stupid ass countries are like, oh, well, we can have children, we'll just send them to Mars. And the Martians are like, we don't want your crotch goblins, dude. We don't want your prisoners. We don't want your babies. Figure out your problems, Earth. You can't just send all the extra people to Mars. And then everyone on Earth's like, why not? That's a great idea. We're really suffering. We're really suffering down here. Also, we do want the vaccine, and we need it. It's pretty crazy. So that's also why the Martian Treaty being renegotiated is huge. It's literally the line of defense against, like, Mars. And who's to say? You know, like, how can you say that if people on Earth are suffering, that you can't send them to Mars to hope for a better life? It's the new world. You know, like, so there's a lot of vested interest, guys. There's a lot of interest in it. And it's very hard to argue. But we're very biased, I think, because we are already on Mars. And you know, if you're already on Mars, you want to be like, get the fuck off of my planet. You're not allowed to come here without agreeing with my vision. Like, so there's a lot of people who are on Mars who don't want more people coming to Mars. Like, and it's very hard to convince people not to come here. I'm getting a pimple on my chin. And so then Frank is up here, like, schmoozing India and China, and he's like, guys, it's like colonialism never ended, am I right? And they agree with him, even though I feel like they're scheming too. They're like, okay, this stupid American is talking to me, and he's like, oh, these stupid Indians and Chinese people are talking to me. I don't know who's going to win. And then he says, he watched the Indian and Chinese look at each other in a completely scrutable consultation. And Frank's, like, got it all figured out. He's playing everyone. And that's what I'm worried about. They believed him. He's like, how about these colonizers, man? Am I right? And they're like, all right, we trust this man. And we want things out of this too. But they don't know what Frank really wants. Nobody knows. And he's literally like, we can nationalize the profits. It's crazy. I really, really enjoyed the first part of this chapter. I'm trying to decide if I should, like, read backwards a little bit. Sung nodded quickly, looking solemn. Perhaps they had foreseen this response and had made their proposal to stimulate it, and were waiting for him to play his part. But that just made it easier. Do you think your governments will agree to such a trade? Sung asked. Yes, Chalmers said. What is it but governments reasserting their power over the transnationals? Sharing the profits resembles in a way your old nationalization movements. Only this time, all countries would benefit. Internationalization, if you will. It will cut down on investments by the corporations, Hanavada noted, which will please the Reds, Chalmers said. Please most of the Mars First groups, in fact. And your government? Hanavada asked. I can guarantee it. Actually, the administration would be a problem. But Frank would deal with them when the time came. They were a bunch of Chamber of Commerce kids these days. Arrogant but stupid. Tell them it was this, or a third world Mars, a Chinese Mars, a Hindu Chinese Mars, with little brown people and cows unmolested in the walk tubes. They would come around. In fact, they would hide behind his knees, yelling for protection. Grandpa Chalmers, please save me from the yellow horde. He watched the Indian and Chinese look at each other in a completely scrutable consultation. Hell, he said. This is what you were hoping for, right? Perhaps we should work on some figures, Hanavada said. And that is where we left off last week. Perhaps we should work on some figures. It took much of the next month to implement the compromise, as it entailed a whole set of corollary compromise. Oh my God. It took much of the next month to implement the compromise, as it entailed a whole set of corollary compromises to get all the voting delegations to accept it. Oh, and by the way, all of the Mars First groups are not voting delegations, if I remember correctly. Because they're like biased or some shit. I'm not gonna look back for it, but that'd be crazy if it was true though. Only nations get delegates? Okay. It entailed a whole set of corollary compromises to get all the voting delegations to accept it. Every nation's delegate had to get a cut to show the folks back home. And there was Washington to be convinced as well. In the end, Frank had to go over the heads of the kids, right to the president, who was only a bit older than them, but could see a deal when it was poking him in the sternum. So Frank was busy. Meetings nearly 16 hours a day in his old pattern, as familiar as the sunrise. In the end, mollifying transnat lobbyists like Andy Jans was the hardest part. Essentially impossible, as the deal was being made at their expense, and they knew it. They put all the pressure they could on the northern governments and on their flags of convenience, and that was considerable, as evidenced by the president's scared irritability. And the defection of Singapore and Sofia from the deal. But Frank convinced the president, even across all that space, even across the deep psychological barrier. But Frank convinced the president, even across all that space, even across the deep psychological barrier of the time lag. And he used the same arguments with every other northern government. If you give in to the transnationals, he would say, then they're the real government of the world. This is the chance to assert the interests of you and your population over those free-floating accumulations of capital, which are very near to holding the ultimate power on Earth. You need to get them back on the leash somehow. Or you need to get them on the leash somehow. And it was the same at the UN, for every official there. Who do you want to be the real world government? You or them? Still, it was a close thing. The pressures the transnats could bring to bear were awesome. It was impressive to watch. Subarashi and Armscor and Shelalco were each bigger than all but the 10 largest countries or commonwealths. And they really put out the funds. Money equals power. Power makes the law. And law makes government. So that the national governments, in trying to restrain the transnats, were like the Lilliputians trying to tie down Gulliver. They needed a great network of tiny lines, staked into place along every millimeter of the circumference. And as the giant heaved to free itself and start trampling about, they had to rush from side to side, throw new lines over the monster, hammer new little pin stakes into place, rush around making quarter-hour pin stake appointments for 16 hours a day. Mad Dutch boy juggling. Andy Jans, one of Frank's oldest corporate contacts, took him to dinner one night. He was angry with Chalmers, naturally, but tried to hide it. As the evening's business consisted of the offer of a bribe thinly disguised, accompanied by threats thinly veiled. Business as usual, in other words. He offered Chalmers a position as head of a foundation, which was being set up by the Earth to Mars Transport Consortium, the old aerospace industries, with their old with their own Pentagon stash still sloshing around in their pockets. This new foundation would assist the consortium to make policy and advise the UN on Mars-related matters. The position was to begin after his tenure as Secretary for Mars was over, to avoid any appearance of conflict of interest. It sounds marvelous, Chalmers said. I'm very interested indeed. And over the course of the dinner, he convinced Johns he was sincere. Not only about taking the position in the foundation, but in working for the consortium immediately. This was work indeed, but he was good at it. He could see the suspicion slowly leak out of Johns as the evening wore on. The weakness of businessmen. The belief that money was the point of the game. They worked 14-hour days in order to earn enough of it to buy cars with leather interiors. They thought it was a sensible recreation to play around with it at casinos. Idiots, in short, but useful idiots. I'll do what I can, Chalmers promised energetically, and outlined some strategies he would start to pursue at once. Talk to the Chinese about their need for land. Get Congress back to the idea of a fair return on investments. Certainly. Make promises here, and some of the pressure would subside. Meanwhile, the work could go on. There was no pleasure like double-crossing a crook. So he went back to the conference table and carried on as before. The walk on the bridge, as it was now being called. Others called it the Chalmers lift. Others called it the Chalmers shift. Had broken the impasse. February 6th, oh my God. February 6th, 2057. LS 144. M15. A red letter date in the history of diplomacy. Now, it was a matter of giving everyone else a piece and fixing the actual numbers. As this process ground along, Chalmers talked with all the first 100 observers there, reassuring them and checking their opinions. Sachs, as it turned out, was upset with him because he thought that if the transnats ceased investment, his terraforming would have to slow considerably. He saw all the arriving business as heat. And yet Anne, too, was upset with him, because a new treaty based on the shift would allow both emigration and investment. And she and the Reds had been hoping for a treaty that would give Mars a kind of world park status. That kind of disconnection from reality made him crazy. "I've just saved you 50 million Chinese immigrants," he yelled at her, "and you bitch at me because I haven't managed to send everyone back home? You bitch because I didn't work a miracle and turn this rock into a holy shrine, right next door to a world that's beginning to look like Calcutta on a bad day. Anne. What would you have done? What would you have done except stalk around glaring at every single fucking thing people said and convincing everyone that you're from Mars? Jesus Christ, go out and play with your rocks and leave the politics to people who can think. Remember what thinking is, Frank," she said. Somehow he had made her smile for a second there, in the middle of his tirade. But she laid the same old wild glare on him before she left. But Maya now. Maya was pleased with him. He could feel her gaze on him when he talked in the public meetings. Millions of people watching, and he felt only that gaze. It made him angry. She was full of admiration for the bridge walk, and he told her only what she would be pleased to hear about the backstage compromises he was making in order to get it accepted. She began joining him in every evening during the cocktail hour, approaching him when the first press of critics and supplicants had ebbed, standing by his side through the second and third waves, watching and easing things along with her laugh, and extricating him from time to time with reminders that they had to go out and eat. Then they would go out onto restaurant terraces under the stars and eat and then sip coffee, looking over the orange tiles and roof gardens under one of the big mesa-topping tents, feeling the evening breeze just as if they were out in the open. The Mars First crowd had committed themselves to his plan, so he had most of the locals, and he had the Home Office. And those were the two most important single parties in the whole process. He judged. aside from the transnational leadership, which he could do little about. So it was only a matter of time before he would work the deal. As he would tell her, sometimes, late in the evenings when he had fallen a bit under her spell, been calmed by her. "Between us, we'll get it done," he would say as he looked up at the vivid stars in the sky, unable to meet her penetrating gaze. And one night, she kept returning to his side during the cocktail gathering. With all the others, they watched the Terran news reports of the day's progress and saw again how oddly distorted and flattened they appeared, like tiny players in an incomprehensible soap opera. And then they left together and ate, and then went walking down the wide, grassy boulevards, eventually coming to his room in the lower town, and she accompanied him inside. Without explanation or comment, in Maya's usual way. As if she always did this. It just happened. Was happening. She was in his room, and then in his arms, hugging him. They lay on his bed, and she kissed them. And she kissed him. She lay on his bed and kissed him. The shock of it was such that Frank felt completely removed from his body, his flesh like rubber. This was beginning to worry him when the sheer animal presence of her broke through the shock. Body spoke to body, and suddenly he could feel her again. Sensation flooded back into him, and he responded to it with animal intensity. It had been a long time. Afterward, she walked around with a white sheet draped over her like a cape, getting a glass of water. "I like the way you work those people," she said, her back to him. She drank from the glass, looked over her shoulder with her old affectionate grin, with that full and open gaze of hers. A gaze that seemed so insightful, like lazed light shining right through him. That suddenly he felt not only naked, but exposed. He pulled the remaining sheet up over his hip, then felt that he had given himself away. Surely she would see the way the air turned to cold water in his lungs, the way his stomach knotted, the way his feet froze. He blinked, returned her smile. He knew it was a wan and crooked smile, but feeling his face like a stiff mask over his real flesh, he took comfort. No one could accurately read facial expressions. No one could accurately read emotions from facial expressions. That was all a lie. A bogus relationship, as in palm reading or astrology. So he was safe. But after that night, she began spending a lot of time with him, both in public and in private. She joined him at the receptions given every night by one or another of the national offices. She sat beside him at many of the group dinners. She sailed the hot sea of conversation with him afterward, as they watched the bad news from Terra, or sat in the close knot of the first 100. And she went with him to his room at night. Or, even more disturbing, took him to hers. And all without any sign of what she wanted from him. He could only conclude that she knew she did not have to speak of it. That just being with him was enough. That he would know what she wanted. And try his best to do it without her ever saying a word. That she would get what she wanted. For of course it was impossible that she was doing it all without cause. That was the nature of power. When you had it, no one was ever again simply a friend, simply a lover. Inevitably, they all wanted things you could give them. If nothing else, the prestige of friendship with the powerful. That was prestige that Maya did not need, but she knew what she wanted. And wasn't he doing it, after all? Infuriating a large part of his power base to forge a treaty that would please no one but a handful of locals? Yes, she was getting what she wanted. And all without a word. Or without a direct word. Nothing but praise and affection. So that as he talked in the endless caucus of conferences, carefully hammering out the wording of each clause of the new treaty, playing James Madison to this strange simulacrum of a constitutional convention, Spencer and Samantha and Maya would wander around helping him. And Maya would watch him with the most fractional smile, which revealed to him alone her approval, her pride in him. And then, energized by the day's work, he would roam the evening reception, and she would laugh at him and stand at his side and chatter with all the rest. A kind of consort. Hell, a consort. And at night shower him with kisses, until it was impossible to imagine that she did not like him. Which was intolerable. That it should be so easy to deceive even the people who knew you the best. That she should be so stupid. It was shocking to realize these things more strongly than ever before. How hidden the true self is. How hidden the true self is, he thought, under the phenomenological mask. In reality, they were all actors, all the time, playing their video parts, and there was no chance of contact with the true selves inside others. Not anymore. Over the long years, their parts had hardened into shells, and the selves inside had atrophied or wandered off and gotten lost. And now they were all hollow. Or perhaps it was just him. Because she seemed so real. Her laughter, her white hair, her passion. My God, her sweaty skin and the ribs underneath. Okay, I have to pee. I'll be right back.